1, 2, 3, 4.
Downloading Scuba Confidential. Welcome back to the show.
We're back,
as Ian always says. So this is episode 18. We're back in the studio. It's a nice sunny afternoon here. Lovely day here in Norwich. With me are my two friends, Mr. Ian.
Hello.
And Louise.
Hello.
This week we've got a few things coming up actually. We're going to talk about what we've been up to. We've got some news items with Louise where we're looking at manta rays and some drug-addled crustaceans.
I've still been looking forward to this news item. It sounds good.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good one as well. We've also got in the studio a couple of guests who we're going to introduce you to a little bit later, who are in to talk about a particular dive destination that we thought might be of real interest to people listening to the podcast. And we'll get to that in due course. So first of all, what have you guys been up to?
Usual thing for me. I've been on dive master duty, helping out the local club and helping out with courses and things like that. So usual sort of thing really for me.
Yeah. All good, enjoying it?
Yeah, all good. And the weather was really nice the other weekend, so that's good. And
is the water heating up? I know you don't like cold water too much.
No, I'm more of a fair weather sportsman, me. So I like the warm weather.
Fair weather sportsman. The king of Bungay.
Absolutely.
How about you, Louise?
Yeah, it's been busy in the dive centre. So we've had lots of training weekends recently. So there's been specialities running like rec, nav and emergency first responder. Also, me and the bear have been looking at holidays for the end of this year.
Mm-hmm. Another holiday.
I know. It's a jet set lifestyle, Ian. What can I say? So we're looking at places in Southeast Asia. So if anyone out there knows of any really good dive centres in Sulawesi, Lembeh, Bunaken, anywhere like that, just drop us an email and let us know. So I'd like to know all about that area. And also I've had a really nice message from one of our Patreons and listeners, James Beluski, with a suggestion for a future episode. And James says, maybe we could talk about some of the mistakes both you and your students have made whilst diving. I know you brushed on a few, such as the dry suit incident.
It's become legendary now.
Mentioning no names.
The thing of legend. But every time my wife and I hear your stories, they are very good reminders of what not to do. Bit of a backhanded compliment, I think.
Yeah. Mistakes? We don't make mistakes, do we?
We're superhuman. Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe that's a good suggestion for a topic for future episodes.
I think so.
But it's always nice to hear from our listeners. Always nice to have feedback and suggestions. So, yeah, cheers for that, James.
Yeah, and get in contact, guys, if there's anything you want to ask us or potential topic ideas. We've got all the social media channels you can find us. We've got our Patreon page, patreon.com/Scuba Confidential, Instagram, Facebook. I think James's question came in via Facebook, which seems to be quite a popular channel for doing it. Ian, you want to say something?
And I just want to emphasise the importance of leaving us reviews and things like that. Always rate and reviews. That's a free way of supporting the podcast.
Yeah, every little helps. Every little helps, whether you're a Patreon contributor or you just give us a nice review and a thumbs up. That all helps. Yeah. That's good. For me, I've been doing a lot of teaching actually because the season's sort of kicking off in earnest. So a couple of nights ago I was teaching nitrox, which actually I really enjoy teaching because I think it can be, if it's done wrong and taught wrong, it can be really dry, but you can add something to it and make it quite interesting. It's more of I was thinking of it as a study of how you're kind of bending oxygen to suit your needs as a diver and sort of bending the laws of physics as much as you can. And at the weekend, it was a rescue course, which I love teaching. I mean, you guys have been involved in a lot of rescue courses over the years, and I love them.
The Murky Pond in Norfolk.
Well, is it in Suffolk? I'm not sure if it's over the border.
Oh, it's on the border, actually, yes. In Suffolk.
You're a Suffolk boy, aren't you?
No, Norfolk. I'm just the wrong side of the river.
I've heard that about you, yeah.
The other side of the Waveney.
The other side of the Waveney. But, we use a a lake for that, which is pretty limited visibility. It's not particularly deep, it's limited visibility, but it's really nice because it's one of those courses as an instructor where you get to really put students through their paces a bit and push them sort of to the edge of their sort of comfort zone a bit and help them to learn and coach them a little bit more. So,
did you find the shopping trolley?
I didn't find.
There's a shopping trolley, and I think there's a car in there as well.
Don't tell me you were narked at about 4 metres in that lake
again. Does happen after about 2, I think.
You know what? To hell with Southeast Asia. I'm going to go to this lake you're talking about.
You don't know what you're missing out on.
It sounds great.
That's because it's near Bungie.
Oh, well, say no more.
Yeah, and on that, I think that's a good time to wrap up what we've
Move on.
We'll move on swiftly from that. I think it's our usual feature now. It's Louise with the news.
A study on pollution in UK rivers has found traces of cocaine in freshwater shrimps. Brace yourselves. Researchers from King's College in London recently ran tests in various rivers throughout Suffolk as part of a study into the exposure of wildlife to different micropollutants. Illicit drugs, including cocaine and ketamine, were found in all the samples tested, which experts have called a surprising find. As well as the drugs, banned pesticides and pharmaceuticals were also widespread in the shrimps that were collected. And Professor Nick Berry from the University of Suffolk said, whether the presence of cocaine in aquatic animals is an issue for Suffolk or more widespread an occurrence in the UK and abroad awaits further research. But certainly what the researchers claimed the potential for any effect on the creatures was likely to be low. Focus was required in the UK regarding the impact of invisible chemical pollution, such as drugs, on wildlife and natural habitat. So I think it's sort of joking aside, from shrimps being under the influence of Class A drugs, it's quite sad. It's a sad, reflection of how far down the water system our modern day living has, all the way through to freshwater rivers in Suffolk. Yeah. And it's actually, being ingested by crustaceans, basically. It's crazy.
And so I think it's endemic of a bigger problem that we see with pollution. I think Ian and I went to the UEA Film Festival a few months back, and there was a really good one of the films in there was really excellent, and it was following a research scientist who was picking up wildlife on an island in the Pacific, I think it was, and finding inside these seabirds and fish all these pollutants and plastic and debris from human waste. And this is kind of a little microcosm of that, isn't it, where they're finding these drugs within the systems of these shrimps.
A micro what?
A microcosm.
Here we go.
Oh, dear. So a microcosm is
You must have looked that up today.
No. So a microcosm is something smaller that extrapolates to something larger. Okay, English lesson over. We're going to move on, I think. Louise, what else have you got?
So, a male manta ray in the Maldives has allegedly returned from the dead.
Wow.
I know. Baba Ganoush, a manta ray well known...
No, sorry, you have to repeat that name. What?
Baba Ganoush. Baba Ganoush.
Wasn't that in a song?
No.
It's a song about Baba Ganoush. Are you high? Baba Ganoush, a manta ray well known to marine biologists and divers in the region, has reappeared in Bar Atoll's Hanifaru Bay 6 months after suffering what were believed to be fatal injuries from a speedboat strike. One of more than 5,000 mantas identified by their spot patterns as part of the Maldivian Manta Ray project, Baba Ganoush has been sighted more than 200 times since 2005. However, in November last year, researchers from the Manta Trust filmed the ray with some serious injuries. According to the Manta Trust, the injuries recorded on him were some of the worst they'd ever seen. And apparently the boat's propeller cut so deep into his body that his internal organs were exposed, leading the team to believe that Baba Ganoush would actually die from his injuries. However, on the 4th of May this year, Baba Ganoush was spotted back in the same bay, looking healthy and extremely well healed. Researchers claim that the recovery illustrates the remarkable ability of manta rays to resist infection and to heal, and allowing them to sometimes survive injuries that otherwise could prove fatal. I think the incident is a really timely reminder of how human behaviour is affecting species on reefs such as mantas, turtles, whale sharks, etc., even in countries that claim to protect them from fishing and activities such as diving and snorkeling trips.
Yeah, I think it's a positive news story, which is nice, but sort of that's slightly tinged by the fact that this poor creature was injured in the first place by human activity. And we've had this conversation before. I think it was around the Great White Photo episodes, about episode 10, something like that. And when we had Samantha on, Samantha Howlett, who's a research scientist, and she was talking about responsible interactions and these kind of things. And I used to see it firsthand where I used to be based in Southeast Asia. There were certain dive sites where the boat would pull up and literally 5 minutes later a turtle would swim towards the boat because they start to make that association between human activity and food.
Yeah. People feeding it bananas, weren't they?
Yeah. And you can try and stop people doing it, but then that relationship forms. They have that cognition where they start to have that pattern of behaviour. So it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Guy Stevens from the Manta Trust, who's actually the founder of the Manta Trust, said that each year as speedboat traffic increases in the Maldives, where little to no speed limits are in place throughout much of the country, the nation's marine life faces a serious threat from the unregulated impact of rapid human development. So I think that's a good summary of what's actually going on. It's great that people want to interact with, like you say, these creatures, but it's got to be done responsibly.
I think so. And it's nice there are organisations like the Manta Trust out there doing that kind of thing. For those of you who don't know the Manta Trust, it was formed in 2011. Certainly the UK Manta Trust is registered in the UK in 2011. But they've got 20 projects worldwide in various different locations where they get involved in education and research and trying to change people's behaviours. And also within that research, you can get involved as well. So they often have projects where you collate photos and provide them with data, which all helps for them to identify families and populations and the movements of some of these manta rays as well. There's a friend of the podcast called Jamie, who's a friend of mine who I know from my time in Asia, and I'm sort of angling to try and get her on the podcast soon to talk about the Manta Trust and a little bit more about what they do and how people can get involved. So hopefully she'll hear this and we'll get in contact and try and get her on. That sounds good. Anything else with the news, guys?
No, that's it for today.
Okay, fantastic. Right, so I think we're going to move on. This week we plan to talk about a particular dive destination, and it's a dive destination that's of interest to a lot of divers and also to myself, to Louise, to Ian, because we've not been there. So in the studio with us today, we've got Chris and Fern. Hello, guys. How are you?
Hi there. Really good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, not bad. Fern, how are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you.
Excellent.
This is the second time for Fern.
It is the second.
She's getting a regular appearance.
Yeah, she's going to have her own spot on the show soon. So you guys I've known for a while. For those of you, obviously a lot of people listening won't know who you guys are. Perhaps you can introduce yourself to them.
Hi, my name's Chris. I've been diving since 1996, and I currently run a dive school, and I've dived pretty much most places in the world. Currently, I'm a PADI course director. I'm also an instructor trainer for technical diving up to full trimix.
Yeah. So how many dives, if you had to make an approximation, how many dives would you say you have logged?
Somewhere in the realms of 10,000-ish.
Yeah. So
Maybe one or two more.
Yeah. You've done a couple of dives.
Just
then.
a few.
Okay. Fern's been on the podcast before, but I thought it might be nice for people who are arriving at the podcast at this stage to find out who you are, Fern. So tell them all about yourself.
Okay, so I have been diving since, I did, as I said before on the show, I sort of started diving as a child, but sort of really got into it in about 2014. I'm now a dive master with our local dive centre.
Any sort of favourite locations you've been diving in the past? Or
Well, as we spoke about on the last episode I was on, Galapagos obviously stands out for me, and the trip that we've just been on, which we're going to talk about.
Excellent. Good. That sort of neatly segues us into what we're going to talk about. It's like you've been here before, Fern. So the particular location we had in mind talking about is one you guys returned from earlier this year, which is Socorro, which is off the coast of Mexico. Sometimes it's known as Mini Galapagos. It's just off the Baja Peninsula by about 200-300 miles, I think, something like that. And it's famous for lots of big pelagic life. amongst other things. So obviously sharks, manta rays, and on lucky occasions things like humpbacks pass through, and this kind of thing. Was that your first trip to Socorro for both of you guys?
It was for me, yeah.
Yep, and for me as well. My first time to Mexico.
Yeah, first time to Mexico.
Yeah.
So what were your overall impressions of the trip compared to other trips?
Overall impression, I was very, very impressed with the boat that we were on, and the crew were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
The diving was challenging but interesting, and it's an underwater topography that I've never seen anywhere else on the planet. It's very, very unique in as much that there are no real corals. It's just seamounts coming up from the middle of nowhere, surrounded by masses and masses of fish.
Right.
When you say it's sorry, Chris. When you say it's a challenge in diving, what do you mean by challenge in diving? What sort of level are we talking about? Because of the strong currents, or
part of it, there are some fairly strong currents, which can make it interesting. Also, you're diving predominantly over a no bottom area, so you'll be dropping in, and you might be diving in depths of 70 to 1,000, maybe 2,000 meters of water.
Yeah.
And it's just a sheer rock face running downwards. So a lot of it's hanging in the blue, waiting for things, looking at things that are passing by.
good buoyancy, stuff like that is all needed.
It always helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just before we get too far in the nitty-gritty of Socorro and the diving there, it might just be nice to ask you guys why you selected that as a location to go on a dive trip. What was the big draw for you guys when deciding to go on a trip to Socorro? Because from the UK, it's a big journey to get there.
So for me, it was the aquatic life, really. You know, having done Galapagos and seen, you know, sort of the spectacle that happens there. It's sort of really, really interested me.
So what aquatic life were you expecting to see there when you talk about the large aquatic life? Did you have something in particular in mind that you were after seeing when you went there?
So mantas, lots and lots of mantas there. For me, I was really hoping to see humpbacks, but we didn't get lucky on that front, did we?
Unfortunately not.
Lots of sharks. Yeah.
So would you say in terms of like the style of diving and the topography that's there in the water, it does earn its reputation as being a mini Galapagos? Does it look familiar beneath the surface like that, with the volcanic rock and the drop-offs and these kind of things?
No. A majority of the Galapagos diving is dropping down 15, 20 metres, hanging into the current on a rock, waiting to see what actually goes past.
Yeah.
Whereas Socorro, you're mainly dropping in and actually swimming around parts of pinnacles or drifting with the currents and actually seeing what happens, coming round points where, again, you've got shelter and you're waiting to see what happens and maybe come back out again.
Yeah.
The Galapagos diving on the reef side of it is fairly simple and it's quite nice in as much that you've got bottom, you've got coral life, you've got other things happening all the time. Whereas Socorro, it was kind of more of a case of there'll be nothing happening for a few minutes, then there'll be a massive school of fish, then there'll be mantas arriving, then they'll disappear and then they'll come back again. So it was kind of a little bit of hanging around and a little bit of sort of seeing what was going on.
So you need to be pretty good at diving in currents. Like for me, when you're diving in currents, you get a feeling for where split points are, where it's pushing you up, where it's pushing you down. Were you using guides out there, or was it kind of briefed and then you can do your own thing?
Everything was briefed and everyone was diving with a guide.
So when you're diving in these kind of locations, in a lot of places there's marine park rules that require you to have a local guide to dive with you. Was that the case in Socorro?
No, I don't believe so.
I don't think it is mandatory, but Nautilus made sure that everyone on board was guided on one of 3 Zodiacs. They had 2 Zodiacs on board, but did 3 runs. So that way they knew that the people were being looked after, but also the guides knew where to go to try and find the best possible locations for the animals we were hoping to see.
Yeah. From my point of view, thinking to put my dive guide head on, were they popping out with Zodiacs pre-briefing? I know a lot of the time the guests aren't aware of it, but you would be aware of it, Chris, because you've worked in these sort of environments before. Were you conscious that the guides were going out in Zodiacs and doing current checks and looking for split points for the current beforehand, or was it just a kind of they kind of knew through repetition, and the captain would just judge where he was going to drop you?
Yeah, I mean, there's limited dive sites,
Yeah,
and most of them were fairly small or on small areas of
right.
the reef. So it would be a case of dropping, and we're going that way because that's the way the current is going.
Yeah,
And because they do it regularly and they'll do the same sites regularly,
they just knew.
they know.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there wasn't a requirement, for example, on a lot of dives do say negative entry.
There were a fair few with negative entry as well.
Yeah.
And again, by choice for a lot of people.
Yeah,
But most of the people on board were fairly experienced divers.
yeah,
So dropping in, meeting at 5-8 metres was quite happy. The guide would already be there.
yeah.
And then off we'd go from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, particularly in a drift diving environment like that.
So we discussed on previous episodes the importance of a really good dive briefing. How did you rate the briefings with your particular crew?
They were excellent, actually. Yeah, sort of really, really safety conscious. Some of the sort of best briefings actually that I've experienced. Yeah, yeah. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, again, the briefings were very thorough. And they gave you a good idea of what the site was going to be looking like before we got in.
Mm.
And again, for a majority of them, they'd insist that at the end of the dive that SMBs went up, or if you were lost, separated, again, deploy SMBs so the boats can find you.
Yeah,
But the boats also didn't leave the areas where we were in. So we knew that whatever happened or wherever we were going, there was someone following that could pick up divers as they came past, which again, sort of all credit to the skippers on board.
yeah. From a safety point of view, was it mandatory that each diver had an SMB, had a computer? That was part of the requirements, I presume, to be on a.
The other thing as well, which a lot of listeners will know, is there's the Nautilus Lifeline out there, which is basically an EPIRB, which you can communicate through as well, which was developed by Nautilus.
Yeah.
So as we got on board, the first thing they did was give everyone one of those.
Yeah.
And say, keep it with you.
You put a deposit down.
No deposit.
No deposit.
Here it is.
Brilliant.
Off you go.
It's very trusting.
Please don't lose.
Because they can get lost sometimes.
As I found out.
Oh, really? It sounds like there's a story here. Do you want to elaborate, Fern?
Well, I lost it.
You lost it. You lost
Yeah,
your Nautilus Lifeline.
Yeah, I think Chris, you lost yours when we were in the Galapagos, didn't you? So it was my turn this time.
Oh,
but
really?
thankfully, another boat picked it up.
Oh, really? That's good because
Unfortunately, no boat picked my one up.
Oh, really? Nightmare, because they're about $200 a pop, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not a cheap thing to lose.
So for us who don't know what they are, what are they?
So essentially, it's like a miniature electronic recall device. It's like a GPS thing with a VHF radio on it.
Oh, okay.
And you have it in a small housing and you clip it to yourself. And then when you go diving, worst case scenario, you get separated and find you popped up in the middle of nowhere in some of these places with ripping currents like Socorro or Galapagos. You can then remove it, signal, and it will give your location to boats in the area down to within a few centimetres.
We have them in this country, don't we, where that alert the RNLI and things like that.
Yeah, so this, you could go on to the internet now and buy one. You know, it's not like there's a magic thing when only special people have them.
Yeah,
it's just it's only really relevant if you know the boat that's there. It's going to be able to pick up the signal. Otherwise, you may as well just be a decoration like a Christmas bauble. You know.
We keep them in the shop, Ian.
I know. I've seen them. So that's good though. It's good to have them.
Yeah, but they are really useful devices. They're becoming more prevalent. It's a bit like how things have developed and people put airbags in cars these days and this kind of thing, and it just.
And the other thing I was just going to ask for people who are listening who don't know, what do you mean by split?
Oh, split current.
Yeah.
So as when there's water movement on sort of reefs and outcrops and pinnacles, as you'd find in Socorro, as the water approaches that pinnacle, it literally has to split to go around it.
Oh,
so that particular split point of the current is a bit like the eye of a hurricane, where you get this sort of calm area within that split. So often if you're in those sort of diving environments and you want to hang around and wait for something big to pass by, the best dive guides and the best captains will know where to drop you so that as you enter the water, you would do a negative entry.
Yeah.
So as in to directly leave the surface and meet with your buddy. And you would try and find yourself a spot in that split where you can hang without finning and not be exposed to the current, which would be prevalent, say, a few feet or a few metres either side of that point. So that's sort of split currents and my perception of diving in them and how I've always done it. But I don't know about you guys. Were you ever dropped specifically at somewhere where there was a split where you had to drop down quickly and find that? Or was it the usual kind of in, few seconds to gather your thoughts, and then down you go and keep the reef on the right-hand side kind of thing?
Some and some. There weren't a huge amount of split currents because, again, the way that it's laid out, the currents will run along the reef wall or along the actual rock faces. But there were times where, or certainly on one of the dives, which turned out to be probably one of the best dives out there, where we jumped in and they'd briefed us on the fact there was going to be a fair current. By the time we'd got in and we'd all dropped to about 15 metres, we were going past the end of the dive site.
So it was like a 2 or 3 knot current just pushing you along, yeah?
Absolutely. But again, you can't plan for that
No, it's
until
nature.
you're actually in.
Yeah.
So to be fair to the dive guide, the first thing that he did was say, at this point we're going to abort. So we were around about 25 metres. And at that point, as we came to all come up together, we pulled our SMBs ready to deploy them, at which point he looked at me and waved as if to say no, because I was about to deploy it under a manta.
That tends to annoy them, I would think.
So we then stopped, got the cameras back out, and we then drifted in the blue for a good 35, 40 minutes following this manta.
Yeah.
And then a lot more happened.
Yeah, excellent.
The diving sounds amazing and challenging as well, all at the same time. So, what for people who don't know this, what was the minimum level or standard of diving? So, have they got to be advanced qualification or minimum 50 dives, or are we talking more? What's the standard to be allowed to go on the boat?
There's no real standard, but it would be recommended minimum of advanced open water or higher, and certainly having a number of ocean dives under your belt just to get the most from any of the dives that are out there.
So probably best to do a liverboard somewhere first, like a Red Sea, something like that. Get the experience there first before you took on board something like this type of diving.
Again, yeah, well said, Ian. I probably wouldn't go on my first liverboard to Socorro.
Yeah.
Not to go and get the most out of what it actually can offer.
Has a reputation for being quite challenging, some of the dives, and we'll talk a bit more about it later. But I'm fairly sure that there will have been 2 or 3 people who had little incidents and got spat off the reef at some point and had to be picked up by the Zodiac, several hundred yards away from where they should be during that week while you were on the boat. Was that the case where people were occasionally having little issues like that?
Yeah, we had a few incidents. Yeah,
it can happen like that, and I think it's exactly right what Chris says, where you kind of build up to some of these more advanced locations and dive sites and this kind of thing. So Socorro itself is 240 miles off the coast of the Baja Peninsula. For you guys, I guess you departed from Cabo St. Lucas, which is down on the south coast there on that peninsula when you went off. What dive operator and which boat were you using? How did you feel about them and the operation itself?
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. So the boat we were on is Nautilus Explorer. Sort of very, very salubrious vessel. She's about 132 foot in length. 10 members of crew to 25 guests, I think, Chris, is that right?
Something like that.
Yeah. And again, they're just, top notch.
Yeah.
Did you get your hot chocolate on when you come back from the dive?
Yeah, we did. Well, yeah.
It's most important.
So that journey to get from the mainland of Mexico to Socorro, which is obviously a Mexican territory, even though it's 240 miles off the coast. What's the sort of journey time? How long does it take you to chug out there? Was it overnight, or how many hours roughly would it take to get there?
So I think it was about 30 hours in total, yeah. So we arrived on the boat in the evening and sort of set off pretty much straight away, didn't we? And didn't arrive at Socorro until...
The following day, about 2 a.m.
Yeah.
So about 30 hours.
Yeah.
It's a long haul.
It is a long haul.
Yeah,
and the boat in that period is going to be travelling at 10, 12 knots or whatever it is, cruising speed. That's a long distance to go. And it's a long time to amuse yourself on a boat that's travelling that distance as well. So,
well, what you need is a good podcast to listen to while you're travelling.
Oh, this is brilliant.
Anybody know one?
Right. So when you started diving, did they break you in gently on some easy dive sites, or was it straight into the main meat of it? Where did you begin?
Well, we had a sort of check dive in Cabo San Lucas, is it? I always get that wrong. So.
Yeah.
Which was pretty,
I didn't go, so I can't comment.
Why
yeah,
didn't you
it was
go, Chris?
pretty
Did
dire.
your mum write you a note, Chris? How did you avoid the check dive?
Well, it wasn't actually mandatory. So.
Oh, no.
It was an optional extra that we could go and do a dive, and there may be some seals if you wanted to go.
Yeah, well, I think
Didn't
you've
you
done
want to wave
sea
at the
lions.
seals?
Sea lions, yeah.
Sea lions.
Oh, right. You didn't want to wave at them.
That's a no.
Well, I think you've done enough dives, Chris, to know you're waiting and that you'd be okay when you finally got to the. It wasn't like you were a 50 dive person,
You'd think so. No, so when we actually arrived, on the islands, as they were, the first dive we did was the boiler. So they certainly didn't break us in gently.
So what was so intimidating about the boiler as a dive site? Can you describe the site? To
Yeah,
the
so
listeners?
it's the boiler's a large pinnacle, rises to around 5 metres below the surface. And when the conditions are right, the surf and swell sort of make it look like it's boiling.
Oh, okay. And where does it go to in terms of depth? Is it one of these ones that drops off and goes down to say 200 metres beneath the surface, and you?
There's a.
It's not. I'm guessing there's not a sandy bottom at 15 metres like Dolphin House.
There's a small plateau at the back of it, which is around about 35, 40.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some sort of shelves that run down it, which is sort of maybe a metre wide, running along and down. But on the main part of the boiler, it is 200 plus metres, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're 20, 30 metres away from it, you're in very, very deep water.
Yeah, yeah. I like the sound of these dive sites. Actually, they sound like my cup of tea. But I can imagine for a lot of people that would be that would be a big step for them for doing those sites initially. And any highlights after that? I mean, how many dives did you do over the period? How long were you on the boat?
We were on the boat for 10 days, and nearly 3 days were travelling.
Yeah.
And in total, we were doing sort of 3 dives a day. And there was an optional night snorkel partway through the week if you wanted to do that with the silky sharks, which a few people jumped off the back and did.
How did you feel about that?
Yeah, we watched and encouraged.
What, the sharks or the snorkelers?
A little bit of both.
I was going to say, you wouldn't catch me snorkeling in the dark on the surface looking like prey at that stage in the evening when it's feeding time for them.
We sat and had a beer instead, didn't we?
That sounds like a much more sensible option to me. So what were the highlights? What was your favourite site?
So I think for me, as Chris said earlier, actually, Cabo Pierce was probably my favourite site, simply because what looked to be a rather uninteresting dive to begin with sort of really turned into something spectacular, didn't it?
It did. Okay, on the Cabo St. Pierce dive, say it was one of those ones that, as we'd hit the end of the reef at about minute 7 and realised that game over,
Yeah.
to be joined by the manta was just incredible. Yeah. So we ended up drifting through the blue as a group of about 8 of us with the guide. And as we were slowly working our way up, the manta just would not leave us alone, which was absolutely amazing. After probably about 15 or 20 minutes drifting with it, something I've never seen underwater or from underwater was the manta decided to start breaching. And the boat captain that was following us, because we ended up nearly two and a bit miles from where we'd started.
Wow, that's some serious water movement.
That is, isn't it? That's a long
He'd
way.
never seen one breach close to him, and it was within 15 to 20 metres of his boat where it left the water twice. And at that point, the manta went, and we thought, well, we've had enough here. But we then ended up in a bait ball of tuna with a load of Galapagos sharks, which was the perfect ending, really.
Sounds like a standard dive, doesn't it? Nothing special about
Stony
that.
Cove the week after.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sounds all right, doesn't it?
Sounds amazing.
So the manta ray itself, it was an individual manta ray. Do you know if it was male or female?
He wasn't really receptive to answering. We were just
answer.
like following.
And what sort of wingspan was it? Was it 4, 5, 6 meters? 15 feet.
Probably around about 5 metres.
About 5
tip to
metres.
tip.
That is huge.
Yeah, so that's about
a big thing.
so basically about 15 feet, isn't it? Something like that. So that's a big fish. Was it close enough that it was inquisitive? They tend to circle round, in my experience, and come in, and occasionally they'll pause next to you, make eye contact, and this kind of thing. Did it do that? Did it, or do one of those vertical ones where it shows you its underbelly?
I mean, that one in particular came relatively close.
Yeah.
And most of them out there do like to follow divers.
Yeah.
And they also like to hover above because they like the bubbles.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool to watch when you're sort of taking pictures or filming, and suddenly this huge manta stops.
Conscious there's a shadow above you, and you.
Yeah, and everyone below it looks absolutely tiny. It's just like, oh my god, that's cool.
So, any stories from the trip you need to tell us?
This is your place to confess.
Yeah.
No, there's only us listening.
Yeah.
I just remember. It's not live.
Well, there were a few interesting moments, weren't there, Chris?
We had a couple of moments, yeah.
The boiler saga.
The boiler saga. Now you've got to tell us what the boiler saga is.
So this was actually, I think, our first dive, wasn't it? Was that our first dive?
No, it was dive number 3 of day 1.
Of day 1, right, yeah. Yeah. You had some equipment problems, didn't you?
Okay.
Sounds interesting.
I don't know how far I can go with this. You
far
can
as you
edit this
like.
part out.
Yeah.
If you need to. But what happened is, wherever I end up diving in the world, I normally dive on a twin set. I'm far more comfy in that because I actually have an allergy to salt water or plankton within it. So I dive in a dry suit. And I find diving in a twin set means that I can offset all the weight that I would normally wear onto my back.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the boat hadn't put my twin set on board, which had been pre-ordered. Needless to say, we'd improvised my wing to dive with a single tank.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a cam strap on it, and with one thing and another, being a slightly larger wing, I had asked the question of a spare BCD on board, which there wasn't. So I said I'll take my wing in, and on the boiler we came up, we were around about the 20 metre mark when we got hit with quite a strong current coming round the actual boiler part, which was an up current as well as a down current. The tank on my larger wing moved, and not normally wearing a weight belt, my weight belt got knocked. My weight belt went downwards, and I was left hanging onto the rock at 20 metres.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
It was one of those interesting moments.
Got your attention.
In a wetsuit, it wouldn't have been so bad, with maybe 2 or 3 kilos of lead missing. In my dry suit, it was a slightly more hanging in type dive.
Because how much would you, if you were to estimate in terms of kilos or pounds, what
I
would
had about 10 kilos of lead, 22 pounds.
Yeah.
I couldn't lift it on my own.
So, luckily, whilst I was hanging on, I did wedge my camera into a rock to hold me, just a bit of stability. And Fern went down to try and lift the belt, which had dropped to 25 metres. The guide had then seen and come over, which is actually quite nice to have a guide. Because again, he was there to look out and make sure everyone was okay. He could then come over, and between the two of them, I'd said to him, don't try and put the weight belt on, just clip it to me. So we could then leave the reef so I wasn't positively buoyant in my dry suit. Make an ascent, make a safety stop, and get out of the water at that point.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting moment, and it's one of those dives that I'll never forget. However, I also haven't had a dive quite like that for so long, because you stick within safe rules, limits, etc.
Yeah.
That it's actually quite nice to actually be able to reflect on it and say, it does happen to anyone at any time, and to expect it.
Yeah.
Don't ever become complacent.
Yeah, I mean, and for a guy of your experience, I mean, luckily you have the experience, the wherewithal, the presence of mind to immediately go and make contact with something secure, to try and signal for help, to wait and be calm. I think that in those circumstances, there are a lot of divers who don't have your experience who would have thought, I'm in trouble here, and just headed for the surface at a rate of knots. And perhaps lost that sense of calm about them, which would have led to something much more serious. So it is a credit to you. I wouldn't expect anything less of you, because I've been diving with you for years and I know what you like in the water. But I think it's something that could have been very, very nasty. You managed to resolve with Fern's help and the guide's help.
As Chris said, it just shows, doesn't it, that you can't just take any divers.
Yeah.
That's what's guaranteed. Everything is always going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that can happen to anyone.
Yeah, exactly. while all this was happening, where were the rest of the group? Were they helping at all?
Well, Manta had just come by in fairness, so they were all a little bit preoccupied.
Fair enough.
So yeah, they and the guide had gone after playing with this manta, hence why it took a bit of time. And a bit of persuasion to get the guide to come back and help me because he didn't quite understand what was going on.
Until he saw the whites of Chris's eyes.
That's it. And he's going, "Oh, manta." Great. We've got a bit of a problem.
More pressing issue to deal with right here. Was there anything else happening on the trip, either good or bad, that sort of springs to mind as something that you'll take away from the trip?
Fern's just going through her journal. It was clearly memorable.
Well, it's always memorable if you have to share a cabin with you, Chris.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
I'm a fairly cheap week.
No, just the sort of usual stuff, really. It was good fun. All the crew were good fun as well. So, the diving was absolutely fantastic. But there are a few memorable moments, on board the boat as well. Yeah.
Anyone you want to give a shout out to who was a member of the crew or anything like that?
I would have to say our captain TJ. He was absolutely
He's good,
brilliant.
was he? Yeah. And what was the boat again?
Nautilus Explorer.
Nautilus Explorer. Okay, well we'll perhaps tag them when we put the episode out, and it's another way of thanking them for the trip that you had. Is there any aside from your equipment malfunction, which was obviously you'd been backed into a corner when we're trying to resolve the lack of equipment on the boat? Is there any safety advice or any tips you'd give to people who are considering doing this trip?
For anyone considering doing it, just be prepared to go out and enjoy some, not deep dives, but some dives in fairly strong currents on big walls, and expect the unexpected, which on so many dives we were out there, it was just a case you'd turn a small corner and then there'd be another manta. The last dive we had 7 of them flying all overhead for nearly an hour.
Yeah.
But again, most of it was spent in the blue off the back of the boiler again.
Yeah.
And it was just an absolutely amazing dive.
Yeah.
So the last thing you want to do is be thinking about anything other than being in the water and watching what's going on.
Yeah. I've always thought that as well. There's this, I think it's because there's so many amazing documentaries like Blue Planet. When people enter the water, they expect to see everything immediately. And you can have a dive that's for an hour, and the first 50 minutes of it, you might not see anything. And you're hanging in the blue waiting, and then the last 10 minutes, something just pops up, and it's like, wow, this is fantastic. So it's always worth paying attention and having your eyes peeled. There's no kind of fanfare or music when a whale shark or a manta or whatever hoves into view.
We did have one day of geological diving, didn't we?
It's a good term for it. I like that. Yeah.
Schooling rocks.
Schooling rocks. Yeah, but that's the gamble, isn't it? It's not a zoo, so you always kind of you just keep your fingers crossed and enjoy the diving regardless of what's going on.
Saying that though, the day that our group, bear in mind we're one of 3 boats, or Zodiacs, we had the schooling rocks, and as I named it, the geographical dive. The third boat going in, which again one of our other divers was on, and he's also one of our dive masters. They did the same dive, same profile as us. They were 10 minutes later, and at the end of it, they had humpback whales. So it goes to show that it is the right time, right place.
Yeah, you just need a little luck, little luck with it.
So it happens, and it was like so nice because I went out with the expectation to see a humpbacks underwater. I've seen them at the surface everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but in a lot of locations. And I was so hoping to see it and to know I've missed it by 10 minutes. But it's just one of those ones that it's so nice to know that someone on board did see them.
Yeah.
And the group of them saw it. So they are there. Yeah. And it is by chance.
Did you by any chance hear them at any time?
All the time.
All the time underwater. Yeah, I was just about to say actually that they were sort of teasing us, weren't they? We were sort of hanging around because you could hear them. But in the end,
because one of the things I noticed, and I've only done one liveaboard, but last year one of the things I noticed was you hear the engine of the boat a lot, and that's really nice when they turn the engines off because you just then hear the noises from the sea. So the whole time you could hear like whales, stuff like that in the distance. And
on lots of the dives, yeah, we could.
That must have been awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe next time you can venture further on the boat, Ian.
Yeah, I know.
You have to get in the water, Ian.
That's might be what I'm doing wrong.
So in relation to it being quite a protected area with, a good range of kind of diverse marine life, are there any particular regulations in that area? So are you allowed to take knives underwater? Are you allowed to wear gloves? Or are certain items of kit prohibited?
So there was an interesting rule about gloves, wasn't there? That you couldn't take gloves in unless you were a photographer. Was that right? Oh. And then you were allowed to wear gloves.
Okay.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it doesn't to me either because,
You either touch or you don't touch.
You touch or you don't touch. I don't think we were allowed knives, were we?
I don't think knives were allowed. Cutting tools, yes, but knives, no. Other than that, because it's an area of national interest, no one's allowed on land other than the military
Really?
and the prison, who has a small house there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had heard that about that actually when I was looking at Socorro and kind of its reputation, the best sort of times of year to go there. And it seems to vary so much in terms of water temperature, in terms of the life you get depending on the time of year you go. So you've got this kind of November to May period, which is considered the best time to go diving there. Then there's this lull in the centre where there's the water heats up and it's perhaps not so good for some of the pelagic life. And then from June through to October, the seas become a little bit too rough for a lot of the vessels to go out there. So there's that, pinpointing the time of year to go there. But I didn't know it was used purely for military until I started looking into it. And it's quite interesting that that's the case, because somewhere like the Galapagos, of course, the side is completely different, where you can go on as you guys did, go on the islands and have a look around, and they're more developed now, aren't they?
They are more developed, but again, on the landmass in Galapagos, only 3% is populated, and you're only allowed, I believe, on about 3% in total. The rest is all set over to being a World Heritage Site.
Yeah. Just one sort of wrapping up about the conditions that you found in Socorro. Obviously, we've talked about currents, up currents, down currents, negative entries, these kind of things, and being prepared to listen to the briefing and kind of be on it in the water, and just be prepared to deal with the currents and hang there. What was the water temperature? Because if you're going to be a lot of the time stationary, just hovering in the blue, you can get a little bit parky when you're just drifting along. Can get a little bit chilly.
Is that a technical phrase, parky?
Yeah, parky, yeah.
I like that.
So what water temperature were you getting?
About 22, 23 degrees. So that was in March.
Yeah. So 22, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. We'll have to convert it later for
78. Yeah.
78, is it? Look at that. Check out the big brain on Chris. So 78 for our American listeners. That's okay, but for me, I would be in a nice, cosy 7mm or a very, very good 5mm. I think that fitted me well. You were obviously in a dry suit. What were you wearing, Fern?
I was in a full-length 5mm that, unfortunately, is a little too big for me. So I was getting decidedly cold on some of those dives.
So were you shaking by the time you were getting back on the Zodiac or being picked up?
Yeah. But again, the crew were lovely. If we sort of came up a few minutes before the rest of the group, the Zodiac would always sort of take me back to the boat to warm up and have a hot chocolate or whatever. So.
Yeah. And in terms of cost, leaving to one side travel from the UK, what's the typical cost to go on a trip to Socorro for like that sort of 7 to 10 day itinerary?
It depends on the cabin you're in.
I'm presuming you had the very best cabin, Mr. Wade.
We had the Emerald Suite.
Did you? People listening to this are going to think you two are a couple now.
Yes, I lived in the living room. Fern had the bedroom. It was like a perfect marriage.
Kicked you out day one.
Yeah. No, the way it fell on the trip with the group that we took out, it ended up that there was an odd number of males and females. I'm fairly old, so's Fern. So it kind of fell that we'd agreed with respective partners that we'd share the room but split it into two, because it was basically 2 rooms with a bathroom.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. But coming back to the cost, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what it would typically cost just for the liverboard itself, ignoring the travel. The
liverboard itself was about $3,800 for the 10 days in the cabins downstairs.
Yeah.
That was per person.
Yeah.
In the suites upstairs, they were between $4,300 and $5,000.
Yeah, which is it's not inconsiderable amount of money, but I know it's very exclusive diving to do when you go there. And it's all inclusive, so I'm presuming that everyone was on nitrox, all the gas was included. I'm presuming that you were well fed and watered while you were on the trip.
We were certainly well fed. Sort of all inclusive, if you like. Obviously, apart from alcohol, which you pay for. There's park fees on top of that, weren't there? I believe
$250.
Yeah. But I think everything else was inclusive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and there was a cold breakfast waiting for you. Go and do the first dive, come back, there was hot breakfast. Next dive, snacks and lunch. Afternoon dive, food, and then a massive meal.
So you put on about £10 while you're on the boat for those 10 days.
Luckily, the currents there like keep you fit.
Well, I can see you're completely ripped, Chris. Obviously, our listeners can't see you, but you look like a triathlete or something. So I think it sounds really good. I'd love to go there. If anyone
sounds awesome.
Yeah, if anyone there is running liveaboard boat out there and wants to offer us a trip and come out and review it, I'm all ears. Just saying, yeah, drop us a line. But it sounds really good. I suppose the $10 million question is: would you go back there?
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Would you have another bite of the cherry and try and chase that elusive humpback, given the chance?
I think I would.
Yeah.
But I'd probably look at Guadeloupe first.
Yeah.
Before going back there.
Yeah.
The diving up there with the great whites, and there's also the chance of the humpbacks as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to see somewhere different would be more my cup of tea.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks for coming in, guys. We appreciate it. Hopefully the listeners enjoyed the chat that we've had about Socorro in Mexico. Yeah. And I think we'll call it quits there for this particular episode. Thanks for downloading. Thanks for listening if you've made it this far. Don't forget to like us, to share our episodes, to find us on social media. And if you're feeling really brave, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Scuba Confidential, and you can become one of our merry gang and help support us make more episodes. But until next time, thanks very much and bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Scuba Confidential. We really appreciate you tuning in today. We'd like to clarify that we're in no way affiliated with any agency or organisation. All opinions expressed during this podcast are our own. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at ScubaConfident1, Instagram and Facebook at Scuba Confidential, and if you'd like to support us via Patreon, go to patreon.com/Scuba Confidential. Any contribution is really appreciated. Additionally, if you have any suggestions for topics or discussions, just let us know at scubaconfidential@gmail.com. Many thanks to Plunkett Music for the groovy tunes, and we'll catch up next time. Until then, keep diving.